so glad today to have a new episode of the podcast series Connecting Social Research to Society. I am with you, Sari Hanafi, Professor of Sociology at the American University of Beirut and the founder of the Portal for Social Impact of Scientific Research in/on the Arab world, the portal called Athar. As I am in an academic visit to Calgary, I'm really honored to have a meeting with Professor Muhannad Ayyash. Marhaba Muhannad.
أهلين فيك. My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, Muhammad Ayyash was born and raised in Silwan, Al-Quds, before immigrating to Canada, where he is a professor of sociology at Mont-Royal University here in Calgary. He's also a policy analyst at Al-Shabaka, the Palestinian Policy Network. He's an author of very numerous, I would say, articles, but two books. The one is just came out, Lordship and Liberation in Palestine-Israel with Columbia University Press, and another one earlier, 6 years earlier, A Hermeneutics of Violence in University of Toronto Press. So he's, as the title clearly indicates, he's into political violence, searching this topic, Zionism, colonial modernity, settler colonial sovereignty, anti-Palestinian racism, and Palestinian decolonial movements. He also co-edited two books, the most recent of which with Jeremy Wildeman. By the way, I know him from the International Sociological Association. So entitled Canada as a Settler Colony on the Question of Palestine. And another one co-edited as well. And he wrote many pieces of op-eds or opinion pieces in Al-Jazeera, in Baffler, Middle East Eye, and others. So again, hello Muhannad.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So Muhannad, first of all, can you tell us how come you went to sociology? What is in relationship to your childhood in Silwan, and then how you moved from Silwan to Canada? Can you tell us a little bit about your this period?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks again for having me. Really pleasure to be speaking with you, and welcome to Calgary. You know, growing up in Silwan, my parents didn't come from. They both came from humble means, especially my father. You know, he was very much an intellectual who read a lot, talked a lot about politics, about religion, about philosophy, about you know, of course, the Palestinian struggle mostly, right? The history of our struggle and the problems that we face, and whether it is internal politics or international politics, and of course against the Israeli settler occupation. So it was a household
as activism or in his profession.
He was not his profession was you know, he had a business in sports.
Okay.
But and then later on, when we were in Palestine, he became director for the rehabilitation center at the YMCA in East Jerusalem.
Okay.
So he started that.
Yeah.
He started that rehabilitation center for the injured from the Intifada.
Wow. The first Intifada.
The first Intifada, yes.
Yeah.
He had no training in social work. He never heard of the term social work when he started this. He just saw a need in the community, that there was all these young people with severe injuries that need help, and so he started this rehabilitation center to kind of help the youth of the Intifada, and did it out of his sheer will, and you know, sense of duty to serve the community, right? And that's what he was doing when we left. So he was not a professional academic or anything like that, but he is still a very well-read man to this day. I mean, he consumes books continuously in all areas of study. So, probably out of the three brothers, the three sons, I was the most engaged with him on these intellectual questions. I was always drawn to it. Even as a young person, I was drawn to conversations with him and learning from him. And I learned a lot from him over the years, and I still do. So I suppose my passion for the intellectual life comes from him. And my mother as well. My mother taught me how to educate myself as well, how to learn as a student. She was a teacher, right? So, in Palestine, and so it was always a path that I was drawn to the intellectual path. And then we came to Canada, and really,
at which age?
I was 14.
14.
I was 14 when we came to Canada, and I was initially drawn more to the sciences, to be fair, especially in high school. I'd say the biggest reason for that is because in Palestine we learned, all the sciences a year before they learned them here. So I mean, it was a difficult experience immigrating to Canada and all of that. But academically speaking, grade 10 was the easiest academic year of my life, because I had done all of that math and science the year before in Palestine, in grade 9. Because I was doing so well in it, I was kind of drawn to it, and I was still getting more comfortable with the English language and writing. I was not doing much of that. So it really, after probably the third year of university, that I switched from the sciences to the social sciences, and I took my first course in sociology, and I really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed the professors in those classes, and thought that, this is a direction that's quite interesting. And I remember as well, of course, reading Edward Said on my own during that time, and that really, it's after reading Edward Said that I'm like, this is the path that I want to go down.
I mean, we have a really more and more. I hear this how the course, elective course, Introduction to Sociology, is transformative for many science students. I mean, where suddenly they say, "Wow! I mean, we don't know how important, how interesting, if you like, this subject." And so you finish your BA, and then what next?
And then I took a break. I took a year off to try to figure out what I wanted to do. And then I thought, what, I really enjoyed that. I'm going to go back and finish my honors in sociology. And then after that, I decided, well, I want to do my master's, and then after that, I want to do my PhD. And it just kind of went that way. It's just, the more I did it, the more passionate I became about it, the more I enjoyed it, the better I became as a writer as well. It took me a while to improve as a writer. So it took a little bit.
So doing your PhD in New York, it's by the way, what was the topic of your?
So for my master's, I examined the neoconservative discourse surrounding the invasion of Iraq. And that eventually becomes my first journal publication. And then for my PhD, it was the core of my PhD is what became my first book, A Hermeneutics of Violence. So that was based on my dissertation. Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about this really very, very interesting book. It's, I would say, between philosophy and sociology, political science. She is a moral philosopher. Very interesting. So can you tell us about this book? And I have some comment about it, as I have the pleasure of read part of it.
Sure.
Many years ago.
Yes, absolutely. So, as you said, the book is not a pure. I've never considered myself a sociologist per se. I'm very interdisciplinary. Like my dad, I follow an intellectual path first and foremost, and whatever discipline takes me to answer the questions that I'm preoccupied with, I run with. So that includes philosophy and, like you said, political science, anthropology, sociology, different different disciplines as well. So Funnily enough, that was a question that I received in both my master's and my PhD is, how is this exactly sociology? And my answer would be, well, it's not exactly, but is that really important? It has sociological elements in it, and that's all that matters. And I had committees that were appreciative of that type of approach and were supportive of it. So
it's not there's a problem. I mean, often are pushed into disciplinary boundaries.
Yes,
I mean,
which limits you. It limits the kind of questions that you can ask. So I wanted to pursue the problem of violence from a multidisciplinary perspective, and that's what I was able to do in that book. It does, it has its elements that are. I've read in one of the reviews that was very almost incomprehensible to some sociologists because it is so philosophically dense. But I do think that there's value in philosophical analysis, and I also view it as my task to also translate that complex, dense philosophy into some more accessible language in my public writing, which I think we'll talk a little bit about later.
So the violence for you is not an event. I mean, this is the major message of the book. I mean, you don't understand the violence by counting casualties and in this time it was some injured, some dead. You don't understand it. It's and this for this reason has a multiple dimensions, so I would like really to tell us about this, because for our audience, I mean, I want them to hear about this.
Right. Okay. So, like you said, so we often view violence as a delimited event. Like, it happens, it starts here, it ends there. This is how you count it, with numbers of casualties, things destroyed, and so on and so forth. But my own experience of living through violence in Palestine. Yes, exactly. Since my upbringing was the first Intifada. I grew up with violence right away. There's no chance to be. I mean, nothing compared to what the kids in Gaza today go through, or the West Bank. But there's no childhood in this context. You have to grow up right away, and you have to come to terms with this thing called violence from the beginning. And it's a very difficult thing to come to terms with and to fully understand. And I use that as my starting point and end point, that it's not something that we can fully understand, but we can try to illuminate its workings, and we have to understand its workings beyond the narrow instrumental ways in which we often conceive it. So that's when I started to think of this idea of different dimensions of violence, that's the different disciplines and different scholarly traditions have in fact already illuminated each of those dimensions, but they haven't named them as such in separate silos, and haven't viewed it as a comprehensive whole, that I still acknowledge we can't wrap our hands around the whole, but we can still try to have a more holistic view and understanding of violence, which is what I try to do in the book. And the most critical part is to try to trace the effects and ongoing movement of violence that often go unseen in our public discourse, in our mainstream discourse, in our conventional understanding of violence. So that's why I start, for example, with the instrumental dimension, because that's how most people understand violence. It's used to achieve specific ends. It's used in this specific period. Once it ends, it ends. And that's not invalid altogether. So that's why I still say it's one of the dimensions of violence that we need to understand. But then it does other things. And the key part, then I argue, in the second dimension, is starts to transform the very subjectivity of those who are enacting violence, promoting violence, propagating violence, and it transforms it. I argue in the third dimension into a direction where it forms this interlocking of enemy siblings, which is the concept that I now draw on more in this new book. But essentially, what that concept is trying to argue is that violence is often used as a way to separate the self from the other. And far from that, it actually does the opposite. It further interlocks the self from the self with the other. But it interlocks them in a specific direction that ensures the continuation of violence.
Yeah, and you have a beautiful article about Hamas and Israel written, if my memory good, in 2017 or
Earlier than that.
Earlier,
Yeah. 2010, I believe. Yeah.
2010. Yeah. So where you really you showed that how this dynamics between Hamas and you cannot understand the violence act or resistant act of Hamas without understanding this protracted period of violence. And I think once I read something, you quote my spaciocyde. I mean, in my work about Palestine, I try to understand that, in fact, if you apply international relation definition of conflict, Palestinian-Israeli conflict is always low intensity conflict. You don't have a lot of casualties, but I show the less you have casualties, the more you have colonization, the more you have land confiscation in an empirical way. I'm not talking rhetoric here. The more you have a settlement, you have the house demolitions, etc. So it means that our gauge, our measurement is wrong. I mean, to understand the conflict. So this is why I come to this idea of a spaciocyde. I mean, it's really making the space unlivable.
Yes.
And so you invite us to see the violence as a long process, if you like, and which take into different dimension, and we can envisage, if you like, that at certain point we will reach the instrumental violence, because we see in the transcendental violence, we see in other dimension. This is very important. But I have another question about this book, but I will leave it to the end.
Sure.
So let us talk about your really, I mean, just 1 month. I am in a mailing list where I saw the announcement of your book about Lordship. Can you tell us about this book?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's on pre-sale now. It comes out in July. I believe July 22nd is when they think it will be published. And it is, in a sense, a continuation of the argument that I started in the first one. But this time, there's although in my head, there's less philosophy. It's actually when I look back on it, or when I recently looked at the final version, I'm like, actually the first 2 chapters are quite dense philosophically speaking, but there's more analysis of Palestine and Israel in this book than there was in the first one. And it focuses more on the question of sovereignty.
Yeah.
And how that can, and how my analysis of violence can help inform our understanding of settler colonial sovereignty, and what might differentiate decolonial sovereignties from settler colonial sovereignty. So, and I make a few adjustments in this one as well to some of the arguments that I made in the first book. But essentially, it is trying to understand how settler colonial violence, in fact, transforms the subjectivities of Israelis into what I call, a posture of lordship, where all of their settler colonial actions, in fact, continuously beget more settler colonial actions. That the cycle of violence that people talk about in public discourse is not between Israeli and Palestinian violence. The cycle is, in fact, internal to Israeli settler colonial violence itself. That each act of violence begets another act of violence, transforming the subjectivity of Israelis not into a free, liberated Jewish existence, sovereign existence, but in fact into a posture or subjectivity, I call it, of lordship that must continuously expel the Palestinian from its midst. But the more violence is used to do that, the less that actually becomes real, even if it achieves it in instrumental forms here and there. and sometimes on mass scale as well, it still actually ensures the impossibility of ever achieving that goal at a final stage. So that all you can actually get from Israeli settler colonialism is a continuation. It's a settler colonial project in perpetuity. And that this can be explained through my theoretical analysis of violence and how that happens.
It reminds me the book of Michel Farchowski. It's a small book in French, actually. Michel Farchowski is a very, I would say, anti-Zionist scholar. He's a husband of Leila B'Tselel, the famous lawyer who always defend the Palestinian prisoner. So Michel Farchowski, I mean, when the first pieces of wall, I mean, erected in Palestinian territories around 2001, 2002, I mean, he wrote this book to show us that, in fact, this is a continuation of the different walls the Israeli society are creating. So it's really a modus modus operandi is a way of living. It become like every time I have problem with Muhannad, I erect a wall. I mean, psychological wall, etc. I distanciate. It is really very important. I mean, how you look to this in a long durée, and until we reach the genocide on Gaza. Can you look? And my presentation will be in Edmonton. It's from space suicide to genocide. The war on Gaza. I mean, where really I see that how the Zionism project move from, if you like, not much casualties, but intensive colonization, to really with after a few years of Oslo, they have almost zero justification. So when you don't have a justification, you become very violent. I mean, if you have a justification, we can discuss. Okay. And I see you wrote about liberal Zionism, right. And now, for instance, in my scholarship, say the problem is not the religious Zionism only. I mean, look to the liberal Zionism. It's like any liberal project was very colonial, was illiberal in the colonies. But I mean, very liberal inside of it. So you don't understand it without it. So there is transformation of the Zionist project, and it's very important to look at it. Can you tell us about this different stage? I mean, how you analyze today, Muhannad, this ongoing genocide? We're still in the middle of it, unfortunately.
Absolutely. So I finished this book September 2023. Was the final draft of it.
Oh my God!
And the unfortunate reality is that when I had a chance to make any final revisions in the fall of 2024, I did not need to change any of the materials in the book.
Wow!
I did not. I added a preface, not a preface, but like a small introduction to the introduction, kind of preface in there, and a postscript. And I said in the intro, I looked at the material, and there's nothing. I don't need to change it. I mean, things have gotten even worse. Absolutely, the level of violence is intensified, no question. But the general contours, the fundamentals of the theoretical argument, need not be changed. And that is because the structure of settler colonial expulsion that underpins the Israeli state has not changed. The foundations, the primary elements have not changed, and this was all too predictable. In 2021, I wrote an opinion piece in Al-Jazeera saying that the next Nakba event of the Nakba is coming. The levels of dehumanization are extremely high. The capacity is there for them to commit another Nakba. I don't see any reason why it's not on the horizon, and that as soon as they see an opportunity for them to do that they would undertake it. And that is unfortunately what has happened. So the levels of intensity have, of course, increased to unimaginable levels that we can't even comprehend right now. And we'll never be able to fully comprehend. You can't comprehend this kind of suffering in its totality. But the foundations are the same. And the goal that drives this project, it's still always the expulsion of the Palestinian. That's it. I mean, and what I've always liked about that article that you wrote on Spatiocide is that it shows how that structure still operates even in the calmness of the peace process, and all of this stuff that is not really a peace process, right? That even in the mundane minutia of policy making on urban development and zoning and permits and these things, it's still the same logic being operationalized, and it can happen without a huge death toll, without these images that we're seeing. But we, it's to me, it's all part of those foundational elements of what Zionism is and what Israel is, and so I think that what we are seeing right now, though, is probably one of the most difficult moments in the history of the Palestinian struggle. There's, these are some of the elements that are not addressed in this book because it was never really its focus, other than to outline that fragmentation and of the Palestinian body politic is part of the Israeli strategy. I do outline that, but we have reached a huge level of fragmentation within Palestinian politics, something that you've written about as well. That these things can, like, that's something that Spatiocide does, is to create different experiences for different Palestinian communities who now no longer have the same interest even in negotiations and what they're
this is Jerusalem versus West Bank.
Exactly. And then the West Bank and Gaza, and then not to mention the diaspora and the refugee camps and so on. So this is a moment where we need a hugely unified front, and it's not there. So this worries me, not just on the level of official politics. A lot of people focus on the reconciliation project between Hamas and Fatah and all of that, but it concerns me also on the level of civil society, on the level of activism, on the level of just social interaction in general.
You said we are unable to comprehend this genocidal project. I mean, this Israeli genocidal practices, but
in its totality.
In totality. But I mean, I would say it's more complex because personally, I cannot comprehend this complicity. I'm trying always not to say Western, not to say it's the West versus the East, but maybe Euro-American, generally speaking. And I think your work on the relationship between Canada and Palestinian territories and Palestine, it can and Israel actually, it can illuminate this. I mean, what horrible complicity we witness. We are watching an every day bold, graphically watching in the TV a genocide, and it doesn't move Canada not to give arm to the Israeli and America and even some European countries. Can you tell us about, and maybe this occasion to talk about your work on Israel and Canada?
Yeah, absolutely. And let me just clarify this, just because I know some people have misheard me when I've said this. When I say we can't understand in its full totality, we can represent a lot of it. We can do the numbers. We can share the stories of suffering. We can share the exact testimonies of the people experiencing the suffering. And so there's a lot we can understand about it, and we should. But it's just so when you look at it and you combine it, even one story is unbearable to hear. And then we have thousands and hundreds of thousands of stories now on top of one another. You can't. No human mind is designed to comprehend that much suffering. It's not possible. So that's what I kind of refer to about that. And we should accept that. And I view that as something that should move people into action. And that takes us to the point of why hasn't there been this action on the institutional level. level. So what we're seeing a lot, of course, is that there's a huge separation between the institutions and the states and the people. I think there's a lot of people that want this to stop. Even in spaces like the US and Canada and the UK and elsewhere. That a lot of people see this for what it is, that they don't buy into the propaganda. This is especially the case among the younger generations, who are not buying into the mainstream media discourse or political discourse around these issues. But states are not responding, institutions are not responding, universities are not responding. They're refusing to take the action that is needed to stop the genocide, which is nothing short of cutting ties with the Israeli state. That's the only thing that you have to punish them for what they're doing in order to stop them. But so they're refusing to do that. Why? The question is why. So to me, you can only understand that question when you understand the context of U.S.-led Western imperial power and their dominance over the globe, and the view that they have of Israel as a critical imperial outpost in their dominance, not just in the region in the Middle East, but over critically things like the energy markets, and so therefore it's tied to their global dominance and in their big rivalry with China. That's the main rival of the U.S. and U.S. understands that this is who is going to really challenge it, if not now, then in the future. And they want to give themselves the advantage right now for any future confrontation. And that means absolutely they cannot allow the Chinese state to make inroads into the region and into the energy markets. They want to maintain their dominance in the energy markets. Israel plays a critical role in creating the security infrastructure in the Middle East. And they keep talking, this is one of the points that was just completely untouched by the Biden administration. Of course, Trump is on board with it as well. And the idea that they always support Israel with is the need to create, quote unquote, a new security reality in the Middle East. They see this as that moment, and they are willing to do anything.
I love your article where you were entitled, if I think, Biden will not be worse than, Trump will not be worse than Biden, something like that.
That's right, because you just look at the fundamentals of the Trump administration's first administration policies. They never changed.
Absolutely.
And so now they're back again, in their different form under Trump and Biden, but still the fundamentals are the same, and so their support is unconditional. And a place like Canada basically finds itself in the American imperial bloc, of course, and as such it will not go against the Americans on this question or others. Now, when we also co-edited that book on the Canada as a settler colony and the question of Palestine, we also emphasized Canada's own settler colonial nature and how that also
relating to indigenous.
That's right. The continuing elimination of indigenous sovereignty on these lands. Canada talks a big game about reconciliation and what have you, but if you bring up, as soon as indigenous sovereignty is brought up, Canada just goes, no, not going to happen. There's no such thing as indigenous sovereignty, and that will never re-emerge on these lands. There's only Canadian sovereignty here. So they're only comfortable with reconciliation so long as resources are no longer on the line. And so that's why it's a continuing settler colonial state as well. And we have to understand their staunch support for the Israeli state as part of settler colonial states sticking together, as part of also this global Western imperial power. So, one can only make the conclusion that the U.S., when it's willing to take the hits that it has taken on the international stage as a result of this support for the genocide, everybody knows. Nobody seriously disputes the idea that without the U.S., Israel will be able to commit this genocide. Everybody knows that they can't commit this genocide without the U.S. active support. So the reason why the U.S. is willing to do that is because one can only conclude is that they look at the pros and cons and they understand that the pros of a new security reality in the Middle East far outweighs any of the negative impacts that they are directly experiencing today as a result of their support and active participation in the genocide. So I think what needs to happen is for a more clear-eyed discussion of that point when we talk about the U.S. role. This is not a matter of the morality of the US or Canada or Germany or the UK failing in this particular moment. This is precisely what they have always been doing to gain their position of dominance. And the global South needs to take a stand. And they have not done so yet. I've said this in publicly before, and I'll say it here right now. We keep focusing on the US is refusing to do anything, the Canada's refusing to, yes, of course, that's all true. But you know who else is refusing to do anything? The Global South. If tomorrow, China, Indonesia, Turkey, Colombia, Brazil, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, God forbid, Morocco, Egypt, all got together and said, we have just formed a coalition. We are all cutting completely ties, all economic ties with Israel, and we are launching a global campaign to ask other states to join us in this. The genocide would stop within a matter of days.
Absolutely.
The reason they're not doing that is
this is, if you like, what is not comprehensible, not only the position of the West, but also the position of the global, some influential countries. I mean, how mild they are. I mean, of course, they send the humanitarian aid from here and there, but I mean, there is no bold positions. And Brexit. I mean, Brexit is in this. Almost doing nothing. I mean, South Africa, I would say the best countries, how they went into ICC, ICGT, and Chile. I would highlight Brazil, for instance. President Lula, who the first used the word genocide. I would say in the early November. He said, "What is going on in Gaza is a genocide," but then collectively there is nothing is happening, and this is really horrible things. So I do remember once I read you, Muhannad, saying something interesting, replying to a debate whether, I mean, if we will engage with if you like, nice Israelis, okay? So I've tried to say whether are liberal or non-liberal. Okay, so if I use this neutral word, nice. I mean, some of them, they argue that there is a competing nationalism, Palestinians and Israeli. And then I mean, if my memory good, you reply to say, look, nationalism and settler colonialism and apartheid are not mutually exclusive, and yes, it can be a competing nationalism, but also you should take into account how this interlink with other logic, etc. Can you tell us about this? Because I found it really very interesting.
Yeah, so usually when people want to say that the settler colonial paradigm is not the right paradigm to use, they're drawing on the idea that this is a nationalist conflict and should be understood within the paradigm of two competing nationalisms fighting competing with each other over competing interests or something like along those lines. The problem with that line of thinking is that modern nationalism emerges in the settler colony. Benedict Anderson, the prominent theorist of nationalism, has it in a footnote that he finds it so astonishing that people. This is in 1994 he was writing this. That people still miss this basic fact and assume that nationalism is this separate thing that happened separately from colonialism and emerged purely within Europe as if it's like an intra-European affair. And he thought that was just like so astounding that people still talk like that when all the facts show that actually modern nationalism emerges in the settler colony, in the quote-unquote new world, and could not be understood outside of it. So the notion that because this is a quote-unquote nationalist struggle, this takes us outside the settler colonial paradigm, shows a lack of understanding of the settler colonial paradigm and the paradigm in general of colonial modernity. Nationalism is not some separate element or competing paradigm. It's an element that exists within the settler colonial paradigm. It can only be understood within it. So this is why it's better to talk about it as Nadia Abul Hajj says, it's a settler colonial nationalism. That's
Yeah.
what it is.
Yeah, yeah,
It's,
yeah.
first and foremost. So,
Yeah.
so this is, and you know, all of these efforts to kind of shift the discussion into nationalism to kind of sort of purify, or not purify, but like sanitize the discussion, are efforts to mislead our understanding and misdiagnose the problem. And unless you diagnose the problem correctly, which is that it is a settler colonial problem, as the Zionist project is a project is of and for colonial modernity, then you're always going to talk about quote unquote solutions that were never going to be solutions because they're not addressing the core issue. So the reason why I keep shifting it into this is not as they assert to quote unquote demonize Israel and all of this nonsense, is to name the core of the issue for what it is so that we can actually get to real solutions and discussions about real solutions. Because I'm clear in my sort of analysis of what would be proper solutions, which I outline more in this forthcoming book. But it has to include Israelis. They're not going anywhere, but they have to be included as equals, not as masters and lords, which is what Zionism turns them into.
Absolutely.
So you can't go and say have a dialogue with someone whose first sentence to you is "I am your master and lord." There's no conversation that is possible in that context. So we have to get them off of that stage to then engage in real discussions. And that's why pressure is what is necessary to try to remove them from the stage of saying "I am master and lord." So that was kind of the point of that article. That was
So one state, two state confederation. This just to contextualize this question I am asking you. So I want you now to push you to say, look, with this all beautiful analysis you did of this conflict, and I would say generally speaking of how to understand the violence. I mean, how would we use this all this analytical moment? I mean, to guide us how to address how to exit violence, how to exit this colonial setting. You know, Michel Viviorca has I think a journal called Exiting Violence. I mean, just he's interested to see how.
It's a difficult question, obviously. So two things. I don't subscribe to the notion of a world that is going to be completely free of violence. It's a nice idea, but we've never seen it. So I don't think the reason I say I don't get fixated on that is because I think that actually is not all that helpful. But let's aim for a world that has at least reduced and limited political violence as best as we can. So what would that entail? First, we need to, I present the analysis to present a clear, comprehensive picture of especially I do that in the forthcoming book, of two paths, competing paths. One is going to be the continuation and propagation of settler colonial violence, and I have to present that in a way that maybe some will view as like, well, I don't know how to exit this, but I'm not trying to tell you can or can't exit it. I'm trying to tell you that this is where we are going right now. So I'm not gonna. I also don't want to lose that element in emphasizing hope too much, because this is. I do think that this is the path that we are on, a path of genocide and greater wars. So to move off of this path, we have to take different forms of action, and most importantly, have different guiding posts for what kind of world we want to create. And this is the path that I call is one of decolonial sovereignties. And in this book, I try to actually switch it from focus on the state to a focus on the modes of sovereignty, because I do think that the problem has more to do with modern forms of sovereignty, which can exist in multiple forms of the state. So you can have multiple forms of the state, but if the form of sovereignty is one of indivisible, absolute, omnipresent sort of power, and that notion of which is settler colonial sovereignty, or the sovereignty that we have come to see in the last 500 or so years through the age of colonial modernity, then you are likely to continue to see the continuation of settler colonial violence, imperial violence, and so on. Because that notion of one indivisible sovereign is not.
Yeah, but when you talk sovereignty, so concretely on Palestinian case, I mean, is it two parliament for instance, and then there is a shared problems. Jerusalem as a shared problem,
right?
Water as a shared problem. The mobility of refugees and population, not only, is another problem, because family is here and there. I mean, I am sure if you have a family in Ramallah, they would never be able to visit your family in Silwan. So
obviously, in some of the more concrete ways, it would mean the end of all of these. It would mean the right of return for Palestinians to all their lands, and the end of the structure of settler colonial sovereignty altogether. You cannot go forward with it. So decolonial sovereignty. So one of the differences between the two is that settler colonial sovereignty aspires, in its aspirations, is built to aspire for indivisible, absolute sovereignty. So in this case, it's the establishment of exclusive Israeli Jewish sovereignty from the river to the sea, which exists today, in fact, and it exists across the entirety from the river to the sea, in some parts legally and in some part unofficially. That's the only difference. Decolonial sovereignty is I say, in its aspirations, it does not aspire for the creation of that type of indivisible power. And that it is more about multiplying shared and layered forms of sovereignties in the plural that can coexist in across the lands.
But concretely,
concretely, I think that can be achieved through different forms of the state. So this is what I mean about that.
Yeah. So for instance, if today, you know why I'm asking you? Because I'm as a sociologist, but also Palestinian and activist. So I do full-fledged analysis like you, and inspiring by you, and I asked the International Sociological Association to if you like, to endorse this, including the BDS as a really one of the major means of struggle. But in the same time, I engage in a more, if you like, in a more not concrete, but mild with concrete, asking EU, so mobilizing large population, those who often don't dare to talk. But this is more and more, including faculty in the United States. I'm not talking about an authoritarian state in the Arab world. I'm talking that that I give them a chance to ask the EU to have a Palestinian-Israeli confederation, end of the occupation, resolve the problem of refugees, etc. But if you look to this statement, who is issued by Thomas Piketty, Giselle Sabiro, and Samuel Mayon, a historian in the United States, actually is we abstain to analyze the conflict, but just we acknowledge that there is occupation, there is a problem, there is a violence, there is a horrible, etc. And we need a way out. So if you like, I acknowledge the importance of this, but I know this is can be misunderstood. So this is why I'm trying to push you, Muhannad, to say, look, after all this beautiful analysis, and particularly you are in a peace studies. I mean, I notice, and you are behind the Peace Initiative Award, for instance, in your university, Mont Royal. I mean, how? By the way, did you engage in a group where you discuss with those who disagree with you? And
I've had
you are still very young. I mean, compared to me. I mean, but I mean, I'm trying to push you, to tease you.
Sure. No, and I appreciate that. No, and look, so where I was going with it is to say that there is a different way of organizing how we understand sovereignty than how it has been happening for the last few hundred years. That is going to actually allow Palestinian and Israeli communities to have sovereign rights on the lands and do it in a way that is shared. Now, for that to be truly about peace and justice, and you can't have peace. You know, when I talk about peace, I don't use it in the traditional sense of that it's used in certainly in liberal discourses. So it's more about like a decolonial justice and peace notion. I am talking about forming alternative forms of organizing social, political, and economic life, and it is certainly possible for Palestinians and Israelis to kind of come up with the, you know, there's only a limit to what I can prescribe right now, because so many of these decisions, because what I'm arguing for decolonial sovereignties is that it would be governance by the people for the people. So a lot of the way in which those structures will emerge should be organic, not with me drawing them up right now. But you want to open it up, that space for that to happen. Now, you will not, you know, you mentioned BDS and what you're talking about, because that is a critical aspect. You're not going to be able to convince Israelis to get off the path that they're on right now, unless you pressure them into it. And that's where without BDS, they'll never transform. So BDS is
like South Africa.
Exactly. Without economic and political pressure, they will not transform. There's only two ways to get out of settler colonial genocide, and that is economic and political pressure or war. I much prefer the political and economic pressure, because that you can actually control a little bit more where you go with that. Whereas with war, as my theory of violence it says, you have no idea where you're going to end up, and it's not necessarily somewhere good. But
and it will come in a discourse, in action. It's not
only it forms in so many ways. It forms and it turns internally. It shows up internally in so many ways. I mean, this is what the Israelis right now are like pretending as if it's not happening, as if like their society is not being torn apart from the inside based on. I mean, nobody commits these genocidal acts of horrific violence and goes back and becomes a normal person. They're not. They're far from it. And the effects that they're going to have internally are going to be felt within their society.
Have you seen a movie called Bashir? Dancing with Bashir?
I've heard of it, but I've never seen
it's
it.
amazing. An Israeli film about the massacre of Sabra and Shatila, and the general, and not the general, one of the officer. I mean, confess with his psyche, with a psychologist.
Right.
I mean, and you see how trauma. I mean, what the meaning of contributing, participating, actively participating in a massacre, and how traumatized. And we saw this is in post-Iraqi war. I mean, the whole. Yes, this is very interesting. I keep pushing you to more concrete, and you refuse.
No. I will give. I will still give you a couple of concrete things. I will give a couple of concrete things.
No. Just I'm saying.
No. But look, I can give you a couple of concrete things. So I think, to me, one of the
when
most
you
critical,
say people, I mean to exercise. I mean, in the end of the day, I mean there is anarchic sovereignty, and there is a more liberal sovereignty, if you like. I'm not liberal thinly. I'm not talking about liberal, etc. So, my dear friend Muhammad Bani talk about no state solution. So one state, not two states. I mean, he go on the line of your analysis, Muhannad.
Yeah.
So
no, I know. I mean, look, I find the new state solution discussion fascinating. Again, but I shifted away from the state altogether to modes of sovereignty, because to me, I mean, what is the state? Is the state a structure in which you're trying to just like to simplify it the most? Is it's a structure that collects resources and then figures out how to distribute them, and ensures to fulfill certain basic functions for the collective. If you think about it that way, you can start to really come up with all sorts of different ways to organize it. So I do think that there's different forms of the state that I think are all can work in the structure of decolonial sovereignties. So that's why I'm just. It's not that I avoid the concrete discussion about this, what the structure of the state. It's just that I find a lot of them good enough to work as long as they operate within the structure of decolonial sovereignties and not the current structure. So, like, one of the most concrete, critical concrete points is, of course, the elimination of all of these colonial borders, and again, the full right of return for Palestinians to all their lands. And guess what? Israelis can live in all the lands now too, because you're going to eventually. I mean, I'm not too much of an idealist on these things. I understand that there's probably going to be needing if we get to where I'm going
about the settlement, for instance.
Yes,
whether we will. Keep the status quo in that case, and then
the thing is, settlements would lose all of their colonial meaning if you remove the settler colonial structures that underpin them. They'll just be buildings with different people living in them.
And different roads. And it's a very ugly apartheid. You know, when I was living in Palestine, and I received once a delegation of Sagogo. Sagogo is a South African coalition of NGOs, if you like. And when they saw the wall and how small all this Bantustans, Palestinian Bantustans, I say, come on. I mean, you see all Palestine. It's the size of a small Bantustans in South Africa. So, and you don't feel you are claustrophobic, but here you are claustrophobic. I mean, what is the diameter of Ramallah, of Nablus, of my God, Hebron? I mean, even you cannot talk about the circle in Hebron, because in the heart of the circle is also colonized. There. So all these issues, So I will not take much more time, but I want looking to your CV, Muhannad. I mean, I'm so glad that you produce pieces in a newspaper. I mean, myself, I discovered you through Al-Jazeera, for instance. And then you write in Al-Shabaka, this network, Palestinian network. I mean, you have a very interesting, scholar write on it for the public. I mean, so this I'm glad that all this complex thought you simplify it into, which is really very good. But then almost nothing in Arabic. Except if
what is translated? Unless it's translated,
unless translated. So why you are you too busy look, I will tell you something. I mean, 20 years ago, I decided to say I will not write anything in English or in French without being translated into Arabic. And sometimes it's from my pocket I translate it. I don't have time to translate it. But I think that the language is very important. And I think your scholarship is very important to the Arab world. So, any comment on that?
Well, first of all, I would be honored to have all of my work translated into Arabic. If you know someone, please let me know. That would be an honor. I would love that. To be honest with you. But
after the interviews, I will tell you some suggestions.
Okay, please do. But in terms of me writing in Arabic, right? That's the question?
No, not necessarily. I mean, it's not necessarily. You need to be eager to that your work to be in a different language.
Yes,
this is time consuming, by the way. I mean, looking for a translator, looking for even if you have a budget from a project to translate, this is very time consuming.
Right.
And the fact that you know Arabic, I mean, it means that you will revise it and you will Arabize it, not only translate it. It means that some argument maybe is so obvious for the Arab, but not for the Canadian.
Yes.
Or the opposite, some theory, you need to explain it better for the Arab world. They are not exposed to Van Das or
Right.
yeah, yeah.
Right. Okay, let me just make this very clear. The few pieces that have been translated into Arabic, I am so happy when that happens. By the way, I just don't know how to be honest with you, it's more of I don't know how to pursue this. So I want to learn from you, because I already want definitely my second book to be translated into Arabic. I mean, that would be the honor of my life, for my dad to read it in Arabic, and for these things, like that would be amazing. So I desperately want that, and I want that to happen, and I will do whatever I can to make that a reality. But I just want to, so in terms of translation, it's not a matter of I don't want to do that. I want that to happen for everything that I've ever written, to be honest with you. I just don't know how to pursue it. But in terms of me writing in Arabic, so a few years ago I did take a course in Arabic, because I'd have to relearn how to write and read in Arabic like properly, and that's not going to come easy. I'm not going to lie. It looked like an overwhelming task, especially because I'm so busy. It's one writing deadline after the next. It's one reading deadline after the next. I have so much to do already, and I just can't find the time. But inshallah, one day, if I write one opinion piece in Arabic, I will be so proud of myself. But I would love to do that. It's something that I want to do, but I know that I try to find the time for it. It's hard.
Do you know now there is something, I don't know if you heard about it, called ChatGPT?
Yes.
For that translation, Muhannad, is great.
Is it?
It's great.
Okay.
But of course, you need to work on it.
Yes.
You need to work on it. But it's nothing to do with Google Translation.
Right.
Look, Google Translation, if you give an academic piece, it will be ridiculous.
Okay.
But ChatGPT really, or the equivalent, it's amazing in bringing some, reducing so much the time of translation.
Okay.
Because
Okay.
So just
okay, I'll keep that in mind.
Small hint.
I will keep that in mind. I will keep that in mind. But it would be an honor of me. Like, it's something that I want. I just don't know how to pursue, to be honest with you. And I also I know I've published a lot, but I always think of like, am I being too full of myself to presume that they would want to translate this into Arabic? So that there's a little bit of that. But I would love to one day, if I write an opinion piece in Arabic that without not that I translated, but purely in Arabic. That might be years away, but I would love to do that one day.
No, and if you like, I think it is really important to engage with the Arab Council for Social Science, for instance, who have every 2 years a workshop. I think it's important to, again, this is really very important, is how you diversify your network into different regions, but also internationally, International Sociological Association. And I was a president of, this is why I make always promotion of asking people to affiliate to.
Yes, absolutely. No, absolutely. And the last 3 years I've attended the annual Palestine Forum in Doha. The majority of the presentations are in Arabic. I'm so glad. This is what I wanted to tell you. Yes.
That whether you went to the Palestine.
I've been to the last 3. Yes.
Wonderful.
So I'm attending all the conferences, and the majority of the presentations are in Arabic, which I can fully understand. But writing and presenting in Arabic is still a challenge. So I still have not done that. Every time I've gone there, I presented in English. I almost did this year to present it in Arabic, but I just didn't have time to prepare. I did not have the time to prepare. But I can listen to the Arabic presentations, and I can understand them fully. So I plan to go back to that as much as I can. So
thank you so much, Muhannad Ayyash, and thank you all for listening to us, and hopefully to see you in other episode of the podcast, Connecting Social Research to Society. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam. Thank you so much.